I'm John Paul Connolly and joined by Father Conroy, and we're here to have a discussion about this book by François Mauriac, What I Believe. Now, this is a little book, and it's made up of a number of different themes. The chapters are quite thematic, and we thought that, given we've both read the book recently, that it'd be quite interesting to talk around some of the themes around the book and try to offer our own thoughts in line with some current issues and debates within the faith and perhaps within society. So this is the first part of the recordings, quite a few themes that we might want to look at. So we're going to break the video into two component parts. So this is part one of our discussion. And I think it makes sense just to introduce who this person was. And I say was because François Mauriac is no longer with us. He died in 1970, and he was a well-known poet, novelist, playwright, journalist, and he won the 1952 Nobel Peace Prize. Is it Peace Prize or just Nobel Prize? I think it's Nobel Prize for literature. And he's a French writer and a Catholic writer as well. And he is known in his writings for placing religious issues at the heart of some of the narrative around the material he's written. And he's often dealing with issues around how each of us and his characters in his writing deal with the problems of sin, grace, and salvation. And his overall argument, if you like, or reflection, is that fulfillment can only really be achieved fully through God. And for us, I think this is quite a good opportunity to reflect on some of the themes that Mauriac highlights in his book. I'd encourage you to have a look at it because it is quite a short, accessible book that highlights quite a few themes that are relevant to today. The first theme that we're going to offer some reflections on from the book is this theme of the light. So François Mauriac talks about the light, and as part of a faith journey, he often thinks about his own life. And he is thinking about his own life because the book is about him, about what he believes. And he talks about how his faith journey is such whereby he decided not to reject the light anymore. And in some ways, this is quite an important theme for people on a faith journey because there's some point, isn't there, where you've got to make a decision as to whether or not to reject the light or accept the light into your life. Father, what was your kind of take on this theme of the light within the text?
I think for me, what came across quite strongly was that this man, François Mauriac, he was part of I suppose, an elite in French society, a cultural elite. And in that first half of the 20th century, it was a very traumatic period in European history with the First World War and the Second World War, but it was also a time where existentialist philosophy was very powerful. People were trying to understand reality, their existence, in terms of their experience. And a lot of the intellectuals of that era had rejected faith, had rejected Christianity, and had opted for a more materialistic approach to their life, to what they were experiencing. And I think Mauriac also at one point felt drawn to that because of this difficulty that I suppose many people have in finding an explanation for why we exist and how we exist. And Mauriac said, well, really what you're confronting is a choice between two mysteries in your life. Science offers explanations, but there's so much that science doesn't explain, so much that science can't explain, and even within its own discipline, there are many unknowns. And he said, well, rationally, that's a mystery that is before us. But he found that perhaps because he was more of a creative spirit, more drawn towards literature and poetry, he found another mystery that was, for him, at least as important, if not more important in life. And that was the mystery that he spoke of in terms of the encounter with another person, the encounter between persons. And he found that as, I think, a richer way to approach life. I suppose in many ways it's the mystery of existence, the mystery of life, the mystery of love. How do we fit into life when these things are something that we have to confront and deal with? Do we reduce ourselves simply to chemical reactions? Or are we more than that? And he made a choice in his life to find value and meaning in his life, to choose that mystery of love, the mystery of life, that we are more than just chemical reactions. And that led him down the path of faith.
Yeah. And I kind of took something similar from it when I was reading what he was saying about, accepting God into his life. It has to be seen in the context of his journey, because early on in the book he talks about how he tried his absolute best in many ways to find ways of not doing that, and to try, a lot like these contemporaries of the time, to look at other explanations for life other than God. And then he got to a point where he started saying, do you know what, it's not working for me, so I need to start looking at life through the prism of faith in God. And clearly that was very much a personal journey for him, and quite an interesting journey, as you say, at a particular time in French society. And in some ways, when I was reading other themes of his book, he talks a little bit about reason, and how the fact, don't tell me to evidence my faith, because that's not what faith is by definition. I found that quite interesting, because in some ways, if you're going to accept the light of life, it's almost having faith in yourself to be able to do that, and to have your faith in God to be with you on that journey. I felt that some of his the issues that he raised reminds me of some of Thomas Aquinas' arguments around things like the argument for contingency. So you started out, Father, by talking about there's only so much science can tell you, and actually some scientists don't always have the answers, and science is something that can only offer so much explanation. And it's this kind of idea of, well, what is it that orders things for us? What gives us the order of our lives? And I felt that came out from the book quite strongly. And he talks about his personal relationships and his family and love. Where does love come from? What does it mean? Is that what the light actually is? Is that what love is? So I kind of felt that there was a strong self-awareness in his book about issues to do with the challenges of accepting your faith within an environment where it's not always easy to do so, but the importance of love and kind of helping you along that journey. So in some ways, I guess it's a story about trusting God throughout your life in a way that, that recognises that there's often distractions away from it. It's sometimes about having the courage to come forward and make a contribution to society based on your faith. I mean, one of the things that you talked about was the historical period. I mean, during the Second World War, Mauriac was part of the writers' organisation against totalitarianism, and it was a harsh critic of fascism as well. So he kind of tried to use his talents in some ways to try and take on challenging societal issues. And for him, he felt that his talent was a gift from God. So I thought that was quite an interesting take on it. But then the opposite side to that, in terms of the light, in some ways, the fact that he actually saw the light, if you want to call it that, or tried to keep the light going in his life, is obviously a kind of ongoing process. But then it's often about trying to jar that, isn't it? A little bit with the opposite of that, the darkness. What's it you took from that, Father, in terms of the opposite of light?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier the mystery of evil. I think love is a mystery. I mean, you can't really explain why you fall in love, but it's almost tangible when love is there. And I suppose that's why our bodies are so important to us as vehicles to express love, because it makes something within us so very strong, gives us an expression. Otherwise, you might explode if you didn't have that physical outlet. And I think it's a strange thing, it's a frightening thing, I think, when you touch evil as well, because that also is something very tangible. And I think, Mauriac living in that period of the 20th century where there was in the totalitarian states where, confronting the Nazi ideology and the Nazi practice, there was something tangible. Evil was tangible there. And I suppose in communism and in Russia, what it did, or the killing fields out in Cambodia, there's something there that seems to go beyond simple humanity. Okay, as human beings, individually, we're capable of terrible things, and we do terrible things. And is it just when it comes to a state doing terrible things, or people with power? Is that all it is? Is it just human nature gone awry, or is there something more? And I think every so often you can't touch evil. You get the sense there is this mystery, there is this darkness. And I think part of the journey of faith is about, in some way you touch the light, but also in some ways you touch the darkness. And you sort of say, well, which way do I want my life to go? What do I want it to be part of? Do I want it to be part of what the light seems to be offering me, that, that experience, which I suppose is an experience of joy and hope and just life. The experience of evil is something else, I think. In some ways, it's an experience of power, because evil does seem to be very powerful. If you confront somebody good with someone evil, very often you find that the evil person resorts to violence. There are all sorts of other things at their beck and call that can force their will on other people. So it's just, and I think faith is sort of saying, you see it a bit more clearly, and you decide which way you want your life to go.
I think that's right. I think it's also, excuse me, it's about the kind of external forces. You're talking about fascism and that kind of almost intrinsic evil that you see through that. But there's also that kind of internal struggle at a personal level that you touched upon. And, when we talk about evil, it's quite a fascinating topic. Personally, I think God's more fascinating. So I'd prefer to talk more about him than the devil or evil. But I think you've got to recognise it. And, in the book, Mauriac uses terminologies like demon. So trying to avoid the demon of your life. And in some ways, I think for a lot of us, terminology like that, is the type of words that we might see in the movies,
Yeah.
in Hollywood, and
Yeah,
it's not,
the Exorcist film.
yeah. So I mean, people talk about that to this day, don't they?
But remember, that was based on a true story, and the church does have official exorcists.
Yeah.
So the church does recognise the existence of this personalised evil that we call the devil, or Satan, or various other names. And I think, yeah, you can experience the evil where it is almost personalised.
Mm. And I think I mean, one of the things that came out of the book, I felt, was trying to guard yourself against that is important, and not putting yourself in spiritual danger. And what are the ways you can remain spiritually healthy? So prayer is obviously one, isn't it? Accepting God, engaging with the Eucharist. These are obviously in the Catholic Church. That's what is taught to us, isn't it?
I think there is this basic recognition within the church of our frailty and human weakness. And I think when we deny that, we deny it at our peril. Not just as individuals, but as humanity as a whole. If we think we're omnipotent and we can do anything we want, I think to some extent that's what we've been doing for the past 100 years or so, and it's getting us into deeper water and trouble. So I think, spiritual care, you have to begin by realising that God is God and we're not. So, the worship has an important part to play in our psyche as human beings and our health as human beings. I think too in our society, our modern society, where this notion of what it means to be an individual has got to the point where it's an expression of my inner feelings. Mm-hmm. And the trouble is, if our inner feelings are bad, if they're depressive, then that's who we are. And I think we see that a lot in society, where depression and things like that are becoming much more commonplace. But it's because people don't have a proper understanding of who they are. And faith is something that can help us with that, I think, because it makes us realise, yes, we are weak, we are frail, we're not perfect, but we've got this grace that is given to us, and we've got this love that is given to us by God to sustain us and help us to grow. Mm. Yeah. And I think prayer is that, both, standing before God in truth, accepting who we are, and despite that, knowing that we're loved and given strength to journey.
I think it's also about fellowship as well, because for as much as, the book that we're talking about, is a personal journey in many ways from the writer, I think one of the things that he does touch on is this idea of being with each other and actually talking about faith issues. But it's almost a complicated tightrope in a way, because he's not an evangelist in terms of how he approaches things.
No, he was very reticent about his faith, wasn't he?
He was. And I think, is there something to be said for that? So not kind of putting your faith on your sleeve too much?
Yeah, I think if we live our faith, if we are, in terms of those commandments that Christ gave us to love God and love our neighbour, if they're there, then I think that's the best that we can do. What's it? St. Francis of Assisi, when he sent out his disciples, he told them to go out and preach Christ to people. And he said, if you have to use words. So in other words, the greatest witness to Christ is what it's done to our lives.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that spiritual self-care can reap so many benefits for other people as well, not just you. in terms of how you interact with others as well. So I think those three themes, I think we've kind of picked up on the kind of first three, which is the light, the dark, and the need for spiritual self-care, which is actually something, you know, if you think about it, is an important aspect of being a Christian generally, and actually it can reap so many benefits to your life. You talked before about, you know, mental health and the challenges around that, and obviously, you know, we're not saying that faith is the answer to everyone's mental health problems. We're not saying that, not at all. But actually, there's something to be said for thinking out of the box in terms of why we're here and where we connect to other people.
Yeah, I think faith isn't the answer to psychological issues, but I think it can help. It can give people, you know, strength. And I think also we are, as human beings, we're more than just our bodies, you know, and we're increasingly encouraged to take care of our bodies, to make sure they're healthy, that, you know, we look after them. And as human beings, we're spirit and body. And so if we don't look after our spirit, it will have an effect on the whole person, our emotional health, our psychological health, and our physical health as well. So I think, because you can't separate us into little bits and pieces, we can't compartmentalize ourselves and put ourselves into boxes. So although it's not the only thing, although we have to look after our emotional health and our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being, they all have an effect on one another. If you don't look after your body, it will affect your spiritual health as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll see you down the gym then, Father.
Well, unfortunately, I think with this level 4, it's going to be closed. The gyms are going to be closed, so I'll maybe wait for a few years.
A few years, right? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this first part of this review of François Mauriac's book. We're going to come back and revisit some other themes around the book. So thank you, Father, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.